So you guys requested a table video and here it is. I know tables are hard to write about because they can contain so many numbers. In today's video, I'm gonna share with you guys 3 tips for dealing with data in a table that shows trends. So the first tip is to report all the numbers in important categories. 2. For less important categories, we report only the numbers in the second year. 3. Group similar categories together to report. Let me use this table to explain. It shows changes in modes of travel. Let's start with details paragraph 1, in which we describe the categories that increased. So, which are the important categories? All modes is definitely important, so I will report its numbers in both years. In 1985, people in England traveled an average of 4,740 miles using all modes of transport, which increased significantly to 6,475 miles in 2000. Here, I used the which clause to show the increase. You can interpret which as referring to 4,740 miles, but to be precise, it actually refers to the entire first clause. What increased significantly? The average miles using all modes of transport increased significantly. Alternatively, you could use this number. By 2000, this number had increased significantly. Again, you could interpret it as referring to 4,740 miles, but really, it actually refers to the entire part of the average miles traveled using all modes of transport. Next, as you can see, the car was the most popular mode of transport in both years, so I will also report its numbers in both years. Car travel was by far the most common means of transport in both years, with an average of 3,199 miles per person in 1985 and 4,806 miles in 2000. Using with is another way to show an increase. You could say with an increase from 3,199 miles per person in 1985 to 4,806 miles in 2000. Or you can simply list the two numbers after with. The next biggest category is other. However, this category isn't important at all. Other is not a single mode of transport. It means other modes of transport. There are probably many forms of transport included in this category. Each mode of transport included in this category probably covers fewer miles than any specific mode mentioned. For example, air travel in 2000 was probably less than 41 miles. Air travel wasn't an important mode of transport back in 2000. That's why it doesn't get mentioned. Every chart can have a category that named Other. It's part of the data collection process. I mean, when you collect data, some unimportant data just falls into the category of Other, right? So I would completely ignore this category. So far, we've included 2 categories in this paragraph. If we continue to write about the remaining 3 categories that increased in this paragraph, it will be too long, won't it? So I'm going to write about them in a new paragraph. For these 3 categories, I would only report their numbers in the second year because they are less important compared to the car. So now I'm going to describe the train. We need to get the subject correct. What increased? Trains can't increase. It is the average distance traveled per person by train that increased. This is good. There's nothing wrong with using the original wording, especially when you don't know how to paraphrase. With that said, there is a more concise way to say it. We could simply say that train travel increased. Now I'm going to make a comparison. I'm going to point out that this number was the third biggest number in 2000, making it the third most used mode of transport that year. I want to explain the use of the word travel. So train travel means travel by train. Moving in a train is a form of transport. That's why it's correct to say that train travel was the third most used mode of transport in 2000. Of course, you can say that trains or the train was the third most used mode of transport, but knowing how to use the word travel can help you vary your language. What about here? A train doesn't have miles, right? it travels miles. Train travel refers to the movement, which can be measured in miles. That's why we say train travel increased to 366 miles. Now, for these two categories, I'm going to group them together to report. Earlier, I said that we can group similar categories together to report. I understand these two numbers are not very close. 42 is actually closer to 41, but there is no way we can group 42 and 41 together to report because travel by taxi increased while travel by bicycle decreased. These two categories will be in different paragraphs, so we need to be smart and find what these two numbers have in common. Well, although 42 is not the single smallest number in 2000, it is one of the smallest numbers that year. So is 124. Like 42, 124 is also among the smallest numbers in 2000. Meanwhile, travel by long-distance bus and taxi also grew, although they remained among the least used forms of transport in 2000. With only 124 and 42 miles respectively. This paragraph is done. Of the 6 categories that increased, I reported all the numbers in the 2 most important categories. For the 3 less important categories, I only reported their numbers in the second year. I also grouped these 2 categories together to report, and I completely ignored this unimportant category. Now let's move on to details paragraph 3, where I will write about the 3 categories that decreased. I think local bus is the most important category here because it has the biggest numbers. I will report both of these 2 numbers. However, travel by local bus showed a substantial decrease, with an average distance of only 274 miles in 2000, compared to 429 miles in 1985. Here, I used compared to show the decrease. I'm adding the here for you guys. For walking and a bicycle, I would group them together and only report their numbers in the second year. I explained earlier in the video that we could use travel and say that travel by foot and bicycle also fail. Alternatively, we could use walk as a verb. The average distances people walked and cycled also fell to 237 miles and 41 miles respectively. All 3 details paragraphs are done. Now let's write the overview paragraph. I prefer the second paragraph to be my overview paragraph, although it's also correct to write the overview in your last paragraph. In this paragraph, we describe the changes in a general way. Generally speaking, the average distance traveled per person increased. I consulted 2 native speakers. They both agree that here it's better not to include by all modes of transport. This is because the average distance traveled per person by all modes of transport increased could be interpreted as each individual mode increasing, which the table shows isn't the case. For example, walking distance decreased. Without all modes of transport, it's clear that we are referring to just the total average distance traveled by each person increasing. By default, the average distance traveled per person per year would include all modes of transport without needing that to be specified. So this is about the trend. The total miles showed an upward trend. Now I'm going to make a comparison. Cars were used far more frequently than other forms of transport in both years. So far, I've stated twice that car is the biggest category. Note the different grammatical constructions I used. Here, I used more than. More frequently than other forms of transport. And in details paragraph 1, I used most. Most common means of transport. The overview paragraph is done. Finally, the introductory paragraph. The data presented in the table illustrates changes in means of transport in England from 1985 to 2000. Here's the entire essay. Let's recap the main points of this video. No matter what chart we get, we need to report all the numbers in important categories. And if it's a table that shows trends, for less important categories, we can report only the numbers in the second year. And always remember to group some categories together to report when there is a lot of data. And here are 4 different ways I used in this video to show trends. 1. Which increased. In 1985, people in England traveled an average of 4,740 miles using all modes of transport, which increased significantly to 6,475 miles in 2000. 2. This number increased. In 1985, people in England traveled an average of 4,740 miles using all modes of transport, and by 2000, this number had increased significantly to 6,475 miles. 3. With an increase. Car travel was by far the most common means of transport in both years, with an increase from 3,199 miles per person in 1985 to 4,806 miles in 2000. Or you can directly list the 2 numbers after with an average of 3,199 miles per person in 1985 and 4,806 miles in 2000. 4. Compare the 2. Travel by local bus showed a significant decrease, with an average distance of only 274 miles in 2000, compared to 429 miles in 1985. This kind of table is actually easier to write about than the kind that doesn't show trends. I encourage you to watch this video in which I talk about how to select data and how to make comparisons for tables that don't show trends. That's it for today. If you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up to help me reach a wider audience on YouTube. Thanks for watching. See you soon.